Welcome to a special Christmas Eve edition of The Skinny. Ken Stout with you, Rico Elmore in the house, the executive producer, Rob Klepper here with us, Smoke, yes, Tony Stewart in the house as well, and a couple of call-in guests. We will feature both of them, two-time Chili Bowl winners, Rico Abreu and Corey Kruisman. Stay with us, it's going to be fun. Welcome, we're coming to you from the Fatheadz studio in Speedway, Indiana. This is The Skinny, making absolutely no reference to myself or Rico Elmore with the name of that one. This place is loaded with talent, excluding myself from that. We have Rob Klepper over here, award-winning broadcaster. Is that true? Did you ever really win any awards?
It is 100% true. I'd have to think about it, but yes, I think there's some awards that we made up and hung on the wall. So yeah,
Cracker
absolutely.
Jack box.
Yes.
Just want to say congratulations.
The back
by the way.
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Christmas Eve edition of The Skinny, and then we also have the executive producer. We call him that because if anything goes wrong, he's the guy you want to call. That's the guy you want to send the complaints to, but Rico Elmore is here. Now, we also have another guest by another name of Rico. That's Abreu. He's out in Northern California. And then, of course, we have one more guest in-house here. We could probably talk about the accolades all night long, but nobody cares about that. The main reason he's here is because he's going to be back at the Chili Bowl, behind the wheel once again. Exciting news. No, not a midget. Behind the wheel of the tractor. Tony Stewart in the house.
Yeah, I don't know how I got suckered into this with you guys, but I guess they figured if we added me to this, we might be able to have two people total combined that can have enough talent in this show to do something here.
We hear Corey Kruisman might call in a little bit later on, and Rob Klepper, of course. I think it was Rob Klepper that pointed it out. This is really the theme is almost the two-time Chili Bowl winners of you and Rico and Corey all winning the thing twice. So pretty cool. And of course, we're going to talk about the Chili Bowl a little bit. But first, let's come off of what happened there at the Dome on Friday and Saturday night. Really Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But that Larson kid seems to be on fire here once again, and this is the one that always escapes him. The Chili Bowl seems to always get away from him for whatever reason, but man, he seems like he is on fire and ready to rock and roll coming off the Turkey night, then obviously at St. Louis as well.
Yeah, he's 7 for 8 as a car owner, if you will, in this new car that he has. Lucas Oil sponsor on the side, but 7-8 wins, kicked all their butts to close out the year with USAC. Went to Turkey night, rained out, ran it the next day. Track was brutally rough, just with all the weather they had there in SoCal, and stunk it up again and picked up his third career Turkey night Grand Prix win. So Kyle Larson right now is certainly one of the, if not the hottest driver on the planet. I think within the last few hours landed over in New Zealand. He'll be racing over there with a lot of the midget drivers as well. So he's got to be the odds-on favorite going into this year's Chili Bowl.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, how do you not pick him as the favorite right now? I mean, he's the hottest guy in a midget. Doesn't matter where it's at. Doesn't matter what the conditions are. And you know he's going to have the bit in his teeth when it comes to Chili Bowl time. I mean, he's probably the hungriest driver to win a Chili Bowl Nationals right now.
Of course, Rico, you might have a little something to say about that. I'm sure you want to chime in and get it done. And if we take a look, a little bit of a change here going into the Chili Bowl this year as well, because it's been Keith Kunz's cars that won this thing for the past 5 years. And, of course, Kyle will no longer be in a Keith Kunz car. He has his own entry, along with Christopher Bell with his own entry. Rico, you probably are up to speed on what's going on with that, but talk to me a little bit about that Keith Kunz team and the powerhouse you guys are already bringing. 8 or 9 cars?
Yeah, Keith always kind of has an army there when it comes to Chili Bowl and throughout his season. So it is always, these things go in spurts with really good drivers and getting in organizations. And Keith's always done a great job with supplying great cars and allowing all of these kids to showcase their talents. So Kyle and Christopher, no matter what cars they get in, I feel like they excel right to the top. And I've always been comfortable in a Kunz car, and I'm looking forward to the Chili Bowl in 2020. I've had a lot of success there over the last few years, and I feel like the car I've ran the last couple years is the same car I've won with. So I'm looking forward to getting back in that thing.
A quick question for you in terms of setup because of your body structure, and you've been with Keith Kunz all along the way. If you were to go to a different chassis, your own car, how switched on are you in terms of how that car is set up? Could you duplicate pretty much what Keith has been doing with your cars?
It's hard. I'm sure, because Keith's had a way that he's done or prepared these cars for however long he's worked on them before I was born. So he's been doing it a long time, and that's why one thing I really enjoy about getting a race for Keith Kunz is I don't have to think about anything. I know that it's when I get in the driver's seat of a Keith Kunz midget, it's going to be the best car I've ever gotten in. So that's what's created all this success from when I've raced his cars and the championships I've won and the Chili Bowls and the wins at Eldora. These races mean so much to me, and I always just leave it up to Keith. And I know when I get in a Keith Kunz car, it's the best prepared car that in that race.
Great stuff. And if you go back and take a look at St. Louis, a good turnout there. And I wanted to ask all you guys about this. And Rob, you were part of this for a little bit as well. I mean, half of those guys are already down in New Zealand, so holidays are gone. You think about Turkey night. You're racing on Thanksgiving night, Thanksgiving Day. They're racing. Then they go and race in St. Louis and immediately hop on a plane. And I think those guys are. I think Christopher Bell's on a plane right now, if I'm not mistaken, headed down there. Kyle already down there along with a bunch of those guys. So how many holidays did you spend away from home running down there?
Quite a few actually, but that's, you think about it as a race car driver, that's exactly what race car drivers want. They want to race all the time, doesn't matter where it is. And you think about these guys that are overseas racing right now. I mean, by the time you get through Turkey night, I mean, that's longer into the calendar year than anybody else runs to begin with in the States. Now you send those guys overseas, and by the time they get to Chili Bowl, they're on their game. They're right in, they've never had an off season. They've never had time to get lazy, gain weight, eat bad foods in the holidays and all that. They're literally on top of what they're doing over there. So when they come to Chili Bowl, it's just like they went from somewhere else the week before, which literally is the case, went from being in a race car the week before to getting in another race car, just like you're in the middle of the summer over here.
And as you say, I'm sure it helps people like Kyle and Christopher Bell get right back up to speed because they haven't run as many races as, say, a Rico or some of the guys that have been chasing USAC national midget points. All those guys, they run the better part of 70, 80, 90 races a year behind the wheel, and Bell and Kyle have to come out of a full-bodied car and kind of catch back up to speed, which it looks like they do pretty easily. And you do that. You bounce around. How hard is that?
It's really not at their age. I mean, those guys have the talent that it's not bouncing. It's literally just how you climb in. It's different, and what it feels like is different. But for those guys, it's just another day at the office for them. I mean, they do it so much that it's not like they're in a car for 12 weeks or 14 weeks and don't get in an open wheel car. So for those guys, it's just it's like getting off of one bicycle and getting on another bicycle. You still do the same thing. It might feel a little different to start with, but it does not take any time for those guys to get used to it. They're up to speed right away.
One of the interesting things about it is it's like, everybody, I was looking at it when we were upstairs a little bit ago of, who's won this thing once, you know what I mean, which is an honor. The group that's on there that's won it is amazing. The ones that have won it twice, I think there's 4 people that have won it twice, and, of course, as you said, Tony, Rico, Corey, and
Dan Bors.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was out of nowhere, but yes. So thanks, Rain Man. But anyhow, so and everybody had a different path getting there, and it was just crazy to kind of look at some of the guys in the beginning how they got there. The Sammy Swindells that, way back that won, Dan, that guy that he mentioned, So, yeah.
Well, and I'm sure Tony remembers because whatever year he won it for the second time, he was running, I think, third, and he got by, you were running second to Jay. He got by Tony with, I think, 2 to go, and he passed Jay, I want to say on the last lap.
On the last lap.
Yeah. It was definitely through
Jay was in a Kunz car.
Yeah, and it drove by Jay. I think Jay was running around the bottom, and Boris went up on top. But he's one of those guys, when we talk about the Chili Bowl, one of those named guys that, as far as mainstream, especially these days with the car count that we have, that you may not know of. You may not, you go, Dan Boris, who was that? But in his day was legit, obviously one of the best midget racers of all time from up there in Wisconsin. And a 2-time winner of the Chili Bowl. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So. And I got to run with him when I started with Keith. I mean, the first time I got to run with Keith was at a 100 green flag lap midget race the weekend when USAC was at the Milwaukee Mile, we ran Hales Corner, and Kevin Doty led the majority of that race. And I don't know if he started running out of fuel or what happened, but he had some kind of a problem, and that's how I won with Keith. But Paige Jones and I ran together as teammates at the time, and I was just getting into full midgets. I didn't get off the bottom very much. I was used to running 3/4 midgets. Paige never got off the top. I never got off the bottom, and we would go through the field. But you had to beat him. You had to beat Randy Cook,
Hatton,
Olson, Scott Hatton. Holson was still in the mix at that time too. I mean, there was some tough talent in Wisconsin it was never an easy road winning a race in that area.
That's what's cool about the Chili Bowl. I mean, like you said, looking over the list of winners, I often like to look at the guys, the big name drivers that haven't won the Chili Bowl, from a Steve Kinzer to a Kenny Schrader back in the day, and all these guys that have raced it.
Donnie Beechler
that haven't won the Chili Bowl.
won it.
Yeah, Donnie Beechler got it.
Which I thought that was
But
awesome.
I still think of all those guys though. When you look at it and you go, which Chili Bowl was one that really stands out in your mind? It's got to be the first one that Rico won. I mean, he won it with such style, and I mean, it was like he took his nuts and threw them over his shoulder and said, "Catch me if you can." And that's the win was big. The celebration was even bigger. I think that was the first time, and Rico can probably answer that better than anybody. That's the first time I can remember that anybody actually flipped the car after the checkered flag was over and doing the celebration. But that's what people remember. I mean, that's probably in my memories of all the Chili Bowls that I've been to and worked now. His first win was the biggest one that I ever remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I believe it was the first one for Toyota, was it not, Rico?
Yeah, it was, and it was obviously very special for me. There's so much buildup in that race. There's so much energy in that building, and it's the year before I felt like I was pretty close to racing up front, and I know the Coons cars. Larson battled there with the Swindells, and Larson ended up falling out of the race, and Bell, something happened, and then I was right up there with Kevin and Brian the first year, and I had to beat both. You straight up just beat them, and that was the coolest part. And then you hear the crowd in the background chanting your name, and it was just so special, really.
How hard? I know we've talked about this before on the TV broadcast. Your driving style is so aggressive. When Rico's on the racetrack, he's so aggressive. He really charges the corner. It almost looks like he drives it in 25 feet further than anybody else, especially on a little track like that. But how aggressive can you be on that racetrack in Tulsa? I mean, it's so small, it's so tight. It's not one of those tracks that's it's easy to get around. It's even though it is just a dirt oval in theory, it seems like it is very technical to try and get around.
It's because he's got all that extra nose weight up there because he doesn't have any weight on the rear tire, so you can get that thing to rotate.
It's it gets tricky when it gets slick and slow, and you got to get really finesse, and the cushion builds up the last few years pretty tall, and the entries get really slick, so it's hard to really hammer it getting in. You're more so focusing on keeping your wheels spin up so you're not slamming your nose when you slam that cushion with your right rear.
Going back to that first win, when you took the lead, could you hear the crowd? Could you see the crowd in the stands? Could you hear them?
I was so focused on making perfect laps. Like, it was so crazy how all of that went down, and catching lap traffic, and knowing that, I always was, back then I was always scared to catch lap traffic, and knowing that, the lap cars could be running side by side, and that lets everyone behind you catch you. And then, if someone wrecks in front of you, but, nowadays you kind of don't worry about that stuff. But it was so, I think I got the lead with like 10 or so to go. So I knew I had to make perfect laps, and it's so hard to do in a race like that. And that's that big. And you just have to just kind of let your instincts take over and go with it.
So you're saying you never saw the crowd, you never heard the crowd when you got the lead like that?
I
you
didn't.
were so focused on your lap. That's
I
crazy.
wasn't paying attention.
It went crazy. Yeah.
How about your first Chili Bowl win?
Well, and Kevin Doty and Corey Kruseman were the two guys I had to beat to win my first one there, and Doty was on the top. Kruseman was probably the fastest car behind me, and I had him kind of hemmed up. But, I mean, literally it was like you said, I mean, it was corner to corner, whether who was taking the lead, whether it was, whether Kevin was getting it back, or if he made a mistake and I got back to the lead, and I made a mistake, he got back to the lead, and then Kruzman's back there, and if I make a big enough mistake, he's probably going to pick both of our pockets. So you couldn't see the crowd, but the lights weren't as good then. I mean, the lights are much better in the Expo Center now than they were.
Did you have the jumbotron?
Did not have a jumbotron.
Did not have a jumbotron.
Now that did come into play the second year I won. The second year I drove my own car for TSR, and I remember J.J. Yaley was running second to us, and I forget why the track was a little off that year, but it was on the bottom. Yaley would try for a lap on the restarts to try to rip around the top, and then after that he'd get back in line. And I think Justin Allgaier ran third that year with no brakes, and had to run the bottom with no brakes to run third. But I do remember I could sit there and look at the big screen on the front stretch, run on the bottom, because you're not running near as hard as you are on the top, and I could sit there and watch my gap. And once I could get enough of about a 4 or 5 car length lead, then I knew I could start opening my entry up and let it have its head a little more on the exit, and then make better lap times. But the first lap or two, you had to kind of protect the bottom, make sure nobody was going to dive underneath you. And Yaley would do that if you gave him that opportunity. So you just had to. That was the advantage of having the big screen at the time, is you could kind of
huge
peek
advantage,
up there.
right? I mean, that's a huge advantage for you guys. Any little thing to help out.
I mean, it's in a perfect spot. I mean, as they come off 4, it's sitting there all the way down
and they've got so much time down to turn 1.
Like
I mean,
3 seconds.
You might as well watch TV for
right
a moment,
There's
I got nothing else to do. Let's watch TV.
I can tell you this: if those guys are watching that TV, there are guys that are going to be in like the F or G main or lower, because they're running. The fast guys are running way too fast to be able to watch that screen and see what's going on. So
you glance up at it, right? Can you glance up at it? Or
I don't
no?
think you can when you're under green. Honestly,
I've never really looked up at it. It's too much of a distraction, I feel like.
If you come around at the right time, you get to watch the replay of what happened behind you and why there's a caution and wreck. But other than that, it's more for the fans.
So I've got one for you. How about a little bit of history of this sport, of this race, I should say. Over 20 years, never had a back-to-back winner, and then all of a sudden, Kevin wins it 4 times in a row. Rico wins it 2 times in a row. Bell's won it the last 3 times in a row. What has possibly changed to go 23 years without a back-to-back win and then have it happen the way it's happened?
Like Rico mentioned, it's a tough race to win by itself. And you think of so many things on your whole your qualifying night sets up everything.
Your prelim night alone, right? I mean,
that's
my
everything.
goodness, just to get through that night is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, out of 80 cars a night, you had to finish in the top 3 just to go to the A. And I think last year, it went down to the top 2.
Yeah, when they added Monday, they
with
took
the Monday
away.
prelim. So you sit there and think that you're racing against 70 some cars, and all of a sudden you've got to finish in the top 3 of that just to lock into the A main, and that's not even going to give you a great starting spot if you're the guy in third. That's going to bury you in the A main, but that's what it takes just to get in the show. So there's so many things from your first heat race, the qualifying race, and then whatever main you're in. I mean, everything has to go right every time you're on the track to even have that opportunity to win, let alone have that same kind of luck 2 years in a row to go back to back. So I watch from the infield now. I mean, I don't know how many years I've been doing the track, and you watch guys like Rico Abreu and Christopher and Larson and Tanner Thorson and these guys that just absolutely. I mean, they drive like they drive like their next lap is what's either going to keep their ride or they're going to get fired. I mean, that's how hard they're driving these things. But to know that there's so many variables, there's only so many variables that can go right, but there's 100 times more variables that can go wrong on a night like that that takes that opportunity away from you.
Well, Kevin Swindell, I think it was last year, he said, you can't win the Golden Driller in your heat race on your prelim night, but you can sure lose it.
Yes.
Because if your week starts out bad, if you start in 3rd or 4th and you have a problem, mechanical issue, you get caught up in someone else's mess and end up 7th, 8th, 9th in that heat race, boom, you're straight to a C main. You got the alphabet soup on prelim night. I mean, you can bury yourself in a hurry, and that's why the cream kind of rise to the top. They're smart. They drive smart. Yeah, they're aggressive, but they're patiently aggressive. I mean, Rico knows, listen, I'm starting 4th. If I can get at least a 2nd, that's going to get me pretty good points going into the qualifiers. So these guys, they have an idea where they're at, but they all want to get up to the front and win, but they're probably not going to go 6 wide to take that opportunity, because if it doesn't go well in that particular heat race, like I said, you can get buried in a hurry.
Rico, when you see where you're starting in your prelim heat race night, when you see where your heat race lineup is, what's your mindset when you get ready to go out for that heat? I mean, what's your approach? What are you thinking as far as, guys that you're with there and where your starting spot? But what's the mindset of what are you truly thinking about right before you push off for that heat race?
Yeah, how aggressive are you, wanting to be right in the beginning?
I think the biggest thing really off the mindset is getting what you can get out of your heat races. You can't go in there and know, man, I got to win this heat race, or I got to finish second or third, or if I start eighth, I have to win. You take what you can get, and you take that to the qualifier, and you take what you can get out of that, and then wherever you start in your feature, you can't. When you put yourself in that kind of a position, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble where you're forcing things, and you're trying to play catch up, or you're trying to fix your mistakes, and you lose 2 more spots. So I just be really patient with it. I think the older I've gotten, the more patient and wiser I've gotten with my decisions, and it's kind of put me in some good spots to have a shot at winning the Chili Bowl.
Yeah, to go along with what you were, I know where you were leading with that is, and because I think the first couple of times that you won that race, Rico, and granted, if you can start off on the pole, you can go pretty hard right off the bat and not have to worry about it too much. But I do feel like you drove really aggressive in those first couple of years, but maybe the next couple of years after that, where you haven't won, maybe that opportunity just has not presented itself. So given what you just said, is there a situation where you say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to be so aggressive that I go out and try to force a top 5 finish here, but conversely, do you think to yourself, I just don't want to make a huge mistake here, and consequently you race a little more conservative?
Absolutely. And you take that, say that 6th or 7th place finish on your prelim night, instead of trying to force something for a 3rd place or a 2nd, and you run that into the B main on Saturday, and you transfer out of the B main. So it's all about putting yourself in good position, and it goes back to where luck beats preparation. If you're prepared and you position yourself in those spots, that's where luck helps you out. But by forcing things, and that's where your Chili Bowl bad luck comes in.
Yeah, and I think it kind of shows how the Chili Bowl format and how it plays out has changed. I'd say more so in the last 10 years than 20 years ago to 10 years ago was totally different. You wanted to draw, when you drew, you hoped that you drew dead last in your heat race and drew a heat race with a lot of slow cars. The problem is now you have so many good cars, there aren't slow cars. You're not going to get a whole heat of slow cars.
You're going to get somebody.
And now, instead of wanting to draw on the tail and hope you can not only win the race and get all the passing points, like Rico said, just start on the pole and win your heat race. Now you're 40th in points already.
Stay out of trouble, right? Just stay out of trouble.
But I think realistically now, I mean, the goal is probably I'd say the sweet spot is probably 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th at the most, that you go, yeah, if I can draw that 2nd row and get a slow 1st row, that's probably best case scenario, because you still want to be in a heat race that you can win the heat for sure and get those maximum points. But then it's how many rows back can you go back to only to pass, how many cars that you can you realistically pass to get to the lead, to get those passing points, to get higher in the standings. So we're used to, I remember watching Andy Hillenberg sit there and start dead last and win the thing by a straightaway. Those days are long gone, somebody starting 8th and winning like that. But that's what makes the whole week of Chili Bowl so cool, are those heat races and watching these big names. Every heat race has got a big name in it. So to watch that guy, and now it's even, there's so many big names in it now that you might have 2 guys in it that are big names in the same heat race. But to watch that guy go from the back, have to pull off some amazing pass to get through some point of the heat race to get to the lead, and then to go on like that. That's what made it all exciting. You didn't want to miss a lap of a heat race the entire week, because that's where, I mean, you saw why these guys were the guys you were going to be watching in the A main on Saturday night, because you knew watching their heat races that they were going to be somebody that was going to get a lot of points, have probably a big night at the end of the night, and go on for big things.
And that's when the crew chiefs don't have any nails left. The dads are pacing. I mean, it's not. And we know it's a humbling building, because not necessarily just because you're good or had a good year means you're going to go make the A-main Chili Bowl, but it's tough. I mean, when you roll down that ramp and you're starting, like you said, you got your heat race coming up, and you go, who's in this thing? I remember our first heat race there. It was like, Tony Stewart, Jerry Coons, Casey Kane, Levi Jones, and then us. And I'm like, awesome. So we're running where we start. I mean, where are you going to go? Like he said, it's stacked, but it's a hectic. And when you're back there, you got a car in the heat race, you're kind of just going, don't do that. Go. It's, and then you get through it and you go, okay, good. We made it. We gained a few spots. Like you said, all four wheels, we rolled back up the ramp, and we can get ready for the qualifier. But it's a hectic moment there for those 10 laps.
And if that's not enough, when you draw your heat race, you're like, who in the hell is this guy?
Right.
Never heard of this guy.
Same thing. You don't know who's this guy here.
Rookies. How about the rookies? They decide, this is where I'm going to make my debut. I'm going to make my name. I'm going to make my name there that week. They're going to know who I am.
It's a good place to start. It's not Winchester. It's not Eldora. It's not the Belleville High Banks. We're going to go to Chili Bowl. But that's the hard part, is a lot of these guys are champions in their region, their local track, and they may be one of the best drivers you've never seen before, or they might be the biggest Scud missile. That's the hard part, is going into it that you got to guard against that. You've got to sit there. I knew as soon as the heat race lineups came out, I sat there and made sure I knew as much about everybody that was in my heat race as possible. Tried to find out. If I didn't know who they were, I found somebody that did know who they were. This guy, wherever he runs, does he run the top? Does he run the bottom?
Is he going to take off on the start?
Does he know where he's going to go when he gets to one? Does he know where he's going to be? Those are the things that you have to know, because like you said, and like Rico said, you've got to give yourself the best opportunity. And part of the best offense is a good defense. You've got to know who you're racing with and what you're up against. And that's where you see a lot of guys get in trouble when they go to Chili Bowl.
That's really interesting information. I race a lot with my son. I spot all the time for my son, and we look at all the competitors that were around in any given race. But it seems like no matter how many times we plan, okay, in the start, let's think about this guy's probably going to do this or this guy's going to do that. You can think about it for 2 days, and it doesn't matter. As soon as they drop the green flag, it all changes immediately. So you actually would do your homework as much as possible, and then really count on, or at least having an idea of where you think that guy wants to go. Did it ever pan out?
Yeah, it did, and it was. I kind of think about watching the bull riders, and they know when they draw that bull, they're like, all right, this bull out of the chute, this bull goes to the left and stays spinning to the left. Or this bull starts out to the left, he's going to jump up, he's going to go back to the right at some point. But that's the things that you had to do. And so, it was almost better if you knew the guys. I'd rather almost ran against guys that were a little bit better, but I knew what they were going to do versus guys that didn't. But, I know the one year I started on the second row, and I knew this guy on the front. Knew who he was, didn't know a lot about him, but just knew that when he went down into one, he was not going to hit the bottom. And sure enough, it was like he was a soapy dish rag and slid clean across in front of everybody. And I just waited and went, thank you, and off you go. But that's just where you got to at least try to understand who are those guys that I'm racing with. What's their tendencies? What could possibly happen? Is this kid going to be one of those guys that's going to drive over you going into the first turn? You're going to have to really guard, give him extra room. You just don't know. And so the more information you can get on these guys, I think gives you that better opportunity to plan out, perfect case scenario of how your race is going to go. And, like I say, sometimes you got to give a guy a little extra room on the first lap because he's going to take more than what he's really going to have. And if you want to take care of yourself, you got to give a little bit.
This podcast has been produced by Fatheadz Studios, and for more on Fatheadz Eyewear, you can always go to fatheadz.com, and that's with a Z.